Welcome to Gen Z Hoops, the Gen Z basketball, coaching, and sports business show. On this podcast, you'll learn from professional players, coaches, and executives from all over the world and see the court in a brand new way. And now, joining you courtside, your Gen Z host, John Hartofilis.
Hey, Dr. Singh, what's going on?
Not too bad. Well, it's kind of snowing outside, which was good because we needed the snow. We've not had as much snow in Michigan, or at least in Detroit area where I live.
It's funny. It started snowing here in New York about 20 minutes to a half hour ago. I was getting ready for the show, and I looked out my window. I was like, "Oh wait, this is new."
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm really excited about just this perspective that you have on not just the medical side, but just going in depth into that niche of sleep therapy, and it's so interesting.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for having me, and say hi to all your listeners and viewers. You said you put this on YouTube too.
Yep. They'll be viewing. They'll be able to see the fantastic background behind you with all the amazing memorabilia from all the teams you work for.
Yeah, thank you. You know, I absolutely love my work. I really do. But when you get something, like that, it's, any new any new ball or a glove or something like that, it just adds to the wall, and then it reminds you that you have to continue to work hard.
It's definitely all serve as reminders for that. And just to get us started, I'm curious, when you were still in school and about to embark on this journey into your profession, what kind of made you realize to go down this path, and what do those first steps look like for you?
While I know that while I was in high school, what I knew I wanted to do is be a physician, to be a doctor. And then when I did my training in sleep medicine, which is, the study of sleep disorders or anything related to sleep, at that time, I realized that sleep has this very unique characteristic. You can really utilize it to enhance performance and health the next day. And that's what I wanted to work on. But how I started working with sports is really happenstance. It just happened a few years ago. And in fact, my first step into working with athletics was with the local NFL team. And so I actually started with working with the pros. And of course, after that, I guess what I did is, I know my subject sleep very well, but I had to really learn about sports and, athletes and the different sports, what their schedules are, what their lives are like, just so that I could help them with their sleep. And in fact, I would say to your audience, it's almost better to set small term goals, because and you have to sort of be agile and flexible, because you sort of learn on the job. And because that's exactly what I did. I learned on the job. And in addition to reading, I think I also formed really good friends who were my allies. So athletic trainers, strength coaches, they all know a lot about the athlete. They know about the game, they know about their schedules. So they're another set of people you can really learn from. And when you set short-term goals for yourself, then you can evaluate what's working and what's not working, and use that to go forward. So yeah, I would say, because I think you mentioned that you have a lot of young people listening to this to your podcast, right? And so,
Yep.
Although it's always good to have a nice long-term goal, you really want to concentrate on short-term goals and sort of learn and be flexible, and always, surround yourself with people who are like-minded, because that really helps you along that journey.
From the big picture point, when you started working with leagues, what have you seen some of those organizations, whether they be the NBA, NFL, MLB, what have they all have you seen them do in terms of sleep engagement for their athletes and making sure their athletes get the right sleep?
Well, so, there has been a dramatic change in how much attention all the leagues are really paying to sleep. And if you talk to old timers, there was a time where, they would be like, for example, in Major League Baseball, they'd be playing for 24 hours. So let's back up, and just for your audience, just let's explain how most of the schedules work for most leagues. So typically, they get to a place, a destination, and they have to play a game that day or the next day. They typically have practices. They have treatments. They may have press obligations. They may have other obligations that their sponsors want them to do. They will then play, and then of course they have to sleep either in their own bedrooms or they have to sleep in hotels. And after they're done with the game, typically they pack up and get on a plane and they go to the next destination. I mean, that's how it works for most leagues. For some sports, they play 3 or 4 games in the same city. On other sports, they'll go, they'll travel. Every time they have to play, they're actually going to a different city. So even a few years ago, there wasn't much interest in sleep, but over the last, I would say, 5 to 6 years, it started about 10 years ago, but especially in the last 5 to 6 years, there's been a lot of attention to how this constant travel, how jet lag, how the lack of sleep can affect performance as well as health the next day. So as you know, in Major League Baseball, just in the last few years, they've made changes to their schedule. So they're trying to pay attention to how many miles a team is traveling, or if they're doing how many back-to-backs they're doing, because they want to reduce that. I know in the NHL, in the CBA, they decided they wanted to make sure that they would they'd protect the players' sleep time. And in fact, they're the ones who put it into the contract that NHL players could no longer would no longer be sharing hotel rooms, which is good because it would protect their sleep time. It would give them the privacy. If they wanted to go back to the hotel room to take a nap, they'd be able to do that. So small things like that. So there has been a uptick in what the leagues are doing when it comes to protecting sleep. Of course, there's a lot of work still to be done.
Of course, and you hear so many amazing success stories of some athletes really embracing these new sleeping methods and really taking it seriously. Can we talk a little bit about Andre Iguodala and him being one of the most famous NBA stories of someone that going into the 2015 NBA Finals really completely changed his
Right.
approach to sleep and overcame what sleep deprivation that had plagued him for the past 10 years of his career. What other stories like that can you kind of reflect on, and how do those all really come into play?
So a couple of things I want to tell you. First of all, so what happened is that a few years ago, there was a study which was done in Stanford student athletes. And these were, so it started with basketball players. And what they did is that it was a sleep extension study. And so over a period of 6 weeks, they made sure they were getting 9 to 10 hours in bed. And they did that by, having them keep a sleep diary and wear, these devices to make sure that they're getting enough rest. And they found there was a significant increase in their performance. So they were faster, they were happier, they were more energetic, they were less depressed, they were less grumpy, but also they were performing better on the court itself. So there was a significant improvement in their actual game. And that was one of the things that led to people and the NBA being more aware of this fact. Now that the story that you're specifically talking about is of this young player who was helped by Cherry Ma. She's a fantastic researcher, and she basically worked with him and helped him almost improve his sleep habits. Because one of the things, and this is available for public record, one of the things he was doing is that he'd be up late at night playing video games. And and as a result, he'd go to bed only between 4 and 5, and then he'd wake up in the morning, go play, and then, take a long nap in the afternoon and do this again and again. And he made those changes, and I think he won, was it MVP for that year?
Finals MVP in 2015. Yep.
Right. So that's what happened. And of course, the press has been, the story about how bad just the NBA schedule is, making it difficult for the players to get enough, or even the team members get enough sleep, is really, they've got a lot of, they've written stories about it, which so now it is, they're more aware of it. I know, I like, on a personal basis, I work with a bunch of teams, not just in the NBA, but in the NBA, the NFL, MLB, as well as the NHL. And the whole point is to, to first of all educate players and all team members, including strength coaches and all the coaches, the coaching staff, even the front office staff, about the importance of sleep, and then give them pointers of how to manage the sleep, especially when they're traveling, how to manage the jet lag, etc. And I work for the Nationals in 2019 when they won the World Series. So that was pretty neat. They sent me a World Series ring. So, and they did really well. In fact, one of the things I was working with them for was helping them when they were traveling in away games, and to make sure that their sleep was well protected, and so that they showed up well rested.
Of course, and it's so interesting thinking about how many times, like, whether it's all the teams that you've worked for in the past and all the success that they've had through really taking sleep seriously. When we kind of, you touched on a little bit about the leagues and how the NBA schedule is a mess in terms of allowing players to get adequate sleep. Do you see the players get insufficient sleep at certain points, whether is it more in the regular season, in the playoffs? Is there research behind that on when there times during the year, because whether it's the off season, that really players need to focus on sleep over anything else?
So, I and a group of authors just wrote a big paper on, it's called The Wake Up Call to NBA, and it's all about sleep, and it describes the schedule in detail. But I would say that there would be multiple reasons why an NBA player at different points would not get enough sleep. Number one, of course, is just their schedule, right? So they could be playing 2 to 3 games, sometimes more per week. And the games are usually night games. They may finish with a night game, and then they may have some difficulty trying to fall asleep once they get, because they're all physiologically aroused. It's difficult for them to fall asleep, especially if they're in a hotel room or even in their own homes. The second thing is, typically they will play a game, they'll pack up, and they'll get on a plane to get to the next destination. Often occasionally they may fall asleep on the plane, and if they do so, then they have difficulty waking, going to sleep in a hotel room. So they may have difficulty initiating or maintaining sleep. The second thing is, of course, there may not just be enough time at night for them to sleep. So they may, so the number of hours may not be enough. The third thing is, of course, the jet lag, when they travel and they cross time zones, and they now have to fall asleep at a time which is not their regular bedtime, or now they have to wake up at a time that's not their regular time that they wake up. And of course, and this can happen all through the season, but then once they get to the postseason, then it may become even more pronounced, because now the pressure to perform and therefore to sleep well before the game becomes even more so. So one of the things you asked me, it was about off season. So off season is important, because if a player has a sleep disorder, so if they have any disorders, like, if they have sleep apnea, or if they have insomnia, or anything that needs to be addressed, the off season is the right time to do it, because they now have the time to pay attention to it. Once the season begins, they really don't have time to devote to this, to treating or managing their sleep disorder. So, and one of the ways that one can manage problems with sleep initiation and maintenance is by therapy. And those kind of skills are best learned while they're off season, and players are aware of it, because they typically work on skill acquisition, which they can use later. in the season. So yeah, that would be a good time for them to be seen.
That's so interesting, thinking about the grand scheme of all these moving pieces and the research that you and your team have done and breaking down the whole NBA schedule. What I'm interested in is kind of the whole thing when it comes to time zones. How much would you say of a disadvantage it is for teams like sleeping in opposing hotel rooms as opposed to their own homes, beds that they're accustomed to sleeping in, having to deal with playing against the team when they're now dealing with a 3 hour time difference while on top of sleeping in all these different locations? What kind of role does that play in do you think, an actual encore performance?
All of us, we have a clock in our brain. It's called your circadian clock, and it keeps time over a 24-hour period, right? It beats. Every day when you wake up in the morning, your clock gets synchronized to your local time by exposure to bright light. So if I'm in Detroit, my biological clock is synchronized to my local time zone. If I take an aeroplane and I fly to California, immediately when I get there, my biological clock is still lagging behind. And that's why jet lag is basically happens when my circadian clock and my circadian rhythms of all the cells in my body are scrambling to get synchronized to the new time zone. This is important for athletes because all the things that decide performance also have a circadian timing, and that gets out of whack when you're traveling. And when you're traveling and you go to a new time zone now, you're supposed to fall asleep at a time which is not your normal bedtime. You're supposed to wake up at a time that's not your normal bedtime. And because of this scrambled biological clock, which doesn't understand that, which is not synchronized to the new time zone, you can have problems with falling asleep and staying asleep. Now, that's called jet lag, and it's very, very important to athletes, because in athletes it means that when you get to your new destination, and typically they'll get there and the next morning they have to get up and play, they may have difficulty falling asleep or staying asleep at the new time zone, and they may not feel refreshed the next day. Also, their peak performance is no longer synchronized, and so they may not be able to play as well. Does that make sense? Now, we have a lot of studies that show that travel can affect performance. So for example, the NFL. In the NFL, they've looked at 40 years of data in which their night games, in which East is playing the West Coast, and West Coast beats the Las Vegas point spread and wins twice as often, because they're at a biological advantage, right? Then there are other sports, in other sports, like for Major League Baseball and the NBA. Anytime you fly from east to the west coast and you cross more than two, the more time zones that you cross, your likelihood of winning gets reduced. And there was a study that looked at Major League Baseball and found that East Coast teams, when they come back after spending some time on the West Coast, they're now jet lagged and they tend to lose home field advantage and lose the first game, especially if their opponents are coming from the same time zone. Anyway, so what happens is that we know all of this, that this is happening. And so, many times, or at least good teams, will have a sleep specialist like myself come in and explain to them how to manage their jet lag, so they can get acclimatized earlier, so when they get to the new destination's time zone, and so they can play better. And the other thing I want you to know is that performance is such a noisy thing that when you're trying to study, because it gets affected by multiple things. So you really have to look at the data. But I know that recently there was a study which was done in the NBA bubble, because the bubble was a very unique situation. These teams were not traveling, they were not crossing time zones, they were playing against each other, and they had ample time to sleep at night. So really they were playing pure basketball. And what they did is they looked, the authors of these studies looked at performance of these teams, and then they compared it to the performance of the same team when they were traveling, and found that they were actually playing better while they were in the NBA bubble, just because the travel was not no longer part of the equation. Typically we think of being asleep and being awake as two very stable states. You're either asleep or you're awake, right? But then we know that there are animals, there's certain birds, there's the dolphin, in which they can sleep with just one part of the brain and the other part. So for example, in birds, there are certain birds when they're flying, especially long distance, they can sleep with just one part of the brain so that the other part of the brain can keep the wings going and they can continue to fly. And again, in dolphins, they can sleep with one part of the brain. That way they don't sink to the bottom of the ocean. And now there's research that has shown that in some people, whenever they're in a strange environment, there's some parts of their brain that doesn't sleep as well, and so they're more hyper aware of their environment. And it might be it might be a throwback to whenever you were in a new environment, you might be in danger, so your brain wanted to keep you awake so that you could protect yourself. And so there are definitely people who have difficulty sleeping, especially in hotel rooms. And so the nice thing is that if you can identify these rookies or young players who have that difficulty, you can tailor your whatever sleep therapy or whatever advice you are going to give to them, knowing that they might have this difficulty, especially when they're going to different hotel rooms. But it is a very common problem. And the other thing is that many times players who fall asleep on the plane, when they get to their hotel rooms, are no longer sleepy because they've taken this long nap on the plane after the game. And so that's another reason why they may have difficulty sleeping once they get to the new hotel.
Of course, and it's so interesting to think about the challenges that might come when a team from New York goes and plays a team from Los Angeles. And not only is it the 3 hour time difference, but now instead of going to bed at 10 o'clock like you're normally used to, you're up in LA now. It would have been 1 o'clock in the morning here in New York because the game goes late. And obviously you're even getting back to the hotel after the game ends at 10 o'clock Pacific, 1 o'clock Eastern. So it's definitely scary to think about.
Yes, and think about it. I have to tell you, first of all, no NBA player is going to bed at 10. They usually go to bed at midnight or 1 o'clock or maybe sometimes later. But even the game time. So if a game begins at 7 p.m. here, that means that once you get from here to California and your game begins at 7 p.m., it's actually 10 p.m. New York time. So and remember, initially your brain is still set, your clock is still set at the home time zone. So it's it's when you're already starting to wind down, but the game is still beginning. And so, but yeah, that would be an issue that they might have.
Of course, and when you brought up taking naps on the planes and that, it got me thinking about, actually, it's funny, with my limited coaching experience coaching at the high school level, a lot of times we'll take the bus right after school to get to our games at 4:30, right? And it's maybe an hour-long bus ride. And a lot of the coaches recommend that the players take naps on the bus for 45 minutes to an hour because they're in classes for 8 hours a day, and then now we have a game, so try to get some sleep. What are your thoughts? Is that actually helpful? Is that not beneficial to have those quick naps in? Because sometimes I find that they're even more tired and groggy when they get off the bus. What are your thoughts on that?
So that's actually an excellent question. We should spend some time with it. So in that case, I would say it may actually not be a bad idea. So a nap, so firstly, let's begin with how much sleep would like a high school athlete or a young athlete need. Typically, they say, they need between 8 to 10 hours of sleep. Many times, because of all the things that they have to do, they may not get enough time to sleep at night. Well, if you take a nap, that adds up to the same hour. So that's a good time to nap. Now, there are a few things about naps themselves. Firstly, it's the length of the nap, right? If you took like a power nap, which is between 15 to 25 minutes, you get some amount of light sleep, you wake up and that's refreshing, you get enough energy for the next 3-4 hours. A 30 to 35 minute nap contains a little bit of stage 2 sleep, which is a slightly deeper sleep, and so it's even more refreshing. But then there's a granddaddy nap, which is like an entire 90-minute cycle. So it's a 90-minute nap, and that's what a lot of NHL or NBA players do. They take this long nap in the afternoon, which all the sleep cycles are in it, and it's very refreshing. The second, so that's the length of the nap. The second thing to be aware of is when would you take that nap, right? So it's better to take the nap in the mid-afternoon where there's a slight dip in your alertness anyways, rather than taking it too late in the evening. So in that case, when they're done from school and they're taking a bus and they're going to an evening game, taking a nap, a short nap on the bus ride is not a bad thing because it'll help to keep them refreshed. If you don't want, you want to wake up within one, at least you want at least 2 hours between the nap time and the time they're actually playing, because otherwise sometimes when you wake up from a nap you're groggy and you don't want to be it to be too close to either kickoff or whenever you start playing the game. So that's one thing to be aware of. Now the NBA players, that thing that I was talking about was when they're done with a nap, with the game, and so they pack up and it's about 11 p.m. or 11:30 when they actually at night when they get on a plane, and then if they do nap on the plane and they get to the new destination at say 3 in the morning or 2 in the morning, then they can't sleep because they napped at the wrong time.
It's really interesting to think about, especially when I think about how it works sometimes better than others. Where if we are playing a 6 o'clock game and the varsity is playing first, I see that it does work better. The issue is a lot of times we're playing at 4:30. We get off the bus, we run into the gym, we get changed, and now we're playing 10 minutes later.
Yeah.
That's where there's the most issues, where guys look like they're like zombies.
And then and that in that case, it might be a better thing to have a shorter nap. So maybe 20, 25 minutes or 30-minute nap. The other thing is that they probably look like zombies because they didn't get enough sleep the night before, right? And if you're sleep deprived, then whenever you sleep, your brain likes to get you into deep sleep so that it can make up for the fact that you're not getting enough sleep. So then even if you nap for a few minutes, because your brain knows, well, I don't know when they're going to, this person is going to give me a chance to nap again, so I might as well get as much deep sleep as possible. And then when you wake up, you're more likely to be groggy.
Yeah, definitely waking up in the middle of that REM cycle isn't a really good idea. When the bus just stops, lights turn on, everyone's out. Definitely transitioning over actually to coaching your sleep muscle, the program that you have that I think is so fascinating. Can you kind of just to start off give us an explanation on what coaching sleep muscle is?
Yeah, sure. So, when I first started, which was again a few years ago, I was once talking to my mentor. His name is Dr. Thomas Roth, and he came up with this idea because I was talking about how, talking about sleep and how you can enhance sleep and work on sleep to make things better or making people play better, make their health better. And he said, well, think of it as a muscle. And so we came up with the catchphrase sleeping no, coaching the sleep muscle, because it was so that athletes could relate to it. So that's something that you can work on to enhance, and that also isn't always painless, right? When you're working out and you're trying to grow a muscle, sometimes the workout itself may actually hurt the muscle. And when you're making changes in your sleep or making suggestions, they're not always, sometimes they're maybe not that comfortable. And so it was just to get that idea across.
Of course, and who are some of the athletes that you've worked with through that program, and what are some of the biggest success stories that maybe it's using some motivation to say, oh wow, like maybe we really should be taking some of these things into practice?
Well, so when the major leagues were sending their teams overseas, either to Europe or when they were sending them to China, Asia, I was helping. So for example, I did some jet lag management and travel planning for the Lakers. I've done it for the Lions. I did it for the Saints. In 2019, I helped the Royal Belgium football team when they went to Kazakhstan to play for a 2020 Euro qualifier. I think working with the Nationals was really a success story, since they came from the back and they won the World Series. That was pretty neat.
Of course, the Washington Nationals that was the year where they started off playing really poorly, right? And then
Yeah.
they ended up okay, because I remember I had Darren Haynes on the show I would say about 2 months ago, and he was a reporter from the DC area, and he was talking about how his favorite team to cover ever was that national squad who started off, I believe, 25-30, and the season was over. What kind of went into that? Where did you kind of start seeing sleep finally start to play a role?
So in that case, during spring training, I went down to Florida. I did help them. I gave them some education, and we started for that team all through the season. Every 2 weeks, I would actually send them a sleep schedule. So I'd tell them on a chart exactly when I thought they should sleep, exactly what time they should wake up, what time they should be taking naps, what they should do when they're crossing time zones, when they should be exposed to light, etc., or not. And they did do that all throughout, but especially when they started winning, because it was really incentive to do it correctly. So for example, I know that once they got into the postseason, whatever their schedule was, they would send me the schedule, and I would give them recommendations of what to do. And I remember that I think it was game three. They lost game three, and I think the Astros got on a plane and they flew back to Houston, while the Nationals spent the night and got well rested, and then left the next afternoon, and they won the next, I want to say, 2 or 3 games, and they won the World Series. So small strategic things like that is what we did. Did work on.
Oh my God, I love that. That's just so it's amazing to think about. I mean, and that's another thing with flights and the strategy that goes into that. Obviously, the team that does it better is going to get the most sleep and be the most prepared
Yes.
to win the game.
Well, so a couple of things. What happens is that when teams are that good, and whenever the competition is between almost equally excellent athletes, then small things like this matter. So then whatever gives you that slight competitive edge is really worth it. And I remember that when they won the World Series, somebody from Yahoo News interviewed me about my work, and they published. I'll share that article with you. And they published that article about how I was sending them these schedules, but they also talked to the players, and the players were talking about how they would look at those schedules as a cheat sheet to say, well, we need to make sure we get enough sleep here, and maybe we can make sure that we can get enough naps. And it was very reassuring to hear that they were actually listening to it and they were paying attention.
Great, and awesome to think about all that. Just to wrap up, if we can do some quick fire Q&As on some of the questions that maybe if anyone can take something away from this, it'd be one of these kind of quick fire answers. This is maybe a basic one that you hear a lot of times, but in terms of a basic guideline, how many hours of sleep should an athlete be getting on a regular basis, and what's the preferred slot for that to be in for your circadian rhythm with the sun rising and all that?
So number one, for the average adult, you need about 7 to 9 hours of sleep. For athletes, the recommended amount is 9 to 10 hours of sleep to get on a regular basis. Now, even if you don't get it all in one block, if you can take naps, that's a good idea. And so that's the timing, the quantity of sleep, right? But the second thing also is the timing of sleep, which is you want to try and sleep in accordance to your biological clock. So if you're a night owl, you prefer to go to bed late and wake up later, that's how you should preferably sleep if your schedule allows you to. If you're a morning person, you want to make sure you get to bed on time, because you're likely to wake up early in the morning. So you want to sleep in accordance to your circadian clock. And the third thing is sleep quality. So when you're sleeping, you want to make sure that it takes you less than 30 minutes to fall asleep. You're asleep 85% or more of the time that you spend in bed. And to do that, things like keeping the room cold and dark and quiet, and keeping it electronic free, not drinking too much caffeine or alcohol close to your bedtime, or not eating spicy meals too close to your bedtime, all of that helps.
Are there positions that you should be sleeping in bed to get the most out of your sleep? And if so, what do those positions look like?
So what body position you're most comfortable is best for you is the one that you're most comfortable with while you're sleeping. There's all the body positions have some advantages, some disadvantages. So if sleeping on your back, for example, might be helpful for your if you have painful joints or shoulder joints, or It may be good for your spine, for your back issue if you have back issues, but then it makes snoring worse. It makes sleep apnea or reflux worse. Sleeping on your side is good if you're a snorer, but it might actually hurt your, it may hurt your joints. Sleeping in the fetal position, when your knees are drawn up to your chest, actually is really good for the spine because your spine is bent in the right way, but then it might compromise your lungs. So again, whatever position you can get the best sleep in is the one that's best for you.
It's so interesting how it's different for everyone, and everyone's sleeping position is going to be different. On that note, what are some of the misconceptions that revolve around sleep that you see in the media all the time that you'd like to exploit?
Well, so I know that I've been talking about, 9 to 10 hours of sleep all the time. But one of the things that happens is that in some people, they may have difficulty initiating and maintaining sleep. So they may have something like insomnia. And for that group of people, talking about 9 to 10 hours of sleep for peak performance may actually be detrimental. And, the approach to sleep has to be nuanced. So, you have to be able to say that this is how much sleep you require. But if you have a problem with sleep, we should explore that, and we should be able to address that. I would say that the biggest problem that I would see in the media is the fact when they're talking about measuring something. So, nowadays there's a plethora of wearable devices or something that you can put in your bed that can actually they say that says it's measuring your sleep. And this thought that anything that measures your sleep actually makes your sleep better is completely false.
Have you seen wearable technology really come on the rise? Because everyone has, whether it's a
Right.
Fitbit or an Apple Watch.
It has. And it's just a trend. And actually, I quite like it for because some players want that feedback. Everybody wants to, there are people who are numbers guys or girls who want to, make sure that they're getting the correct numbers in, as long as you don't obsess about it. So I would say that the only reason to wear this device would be to look at trends over the next like 2 or 3 weeks to see how much sleep you're getting on, say, weekdays versus weekends or on your non-working days. I wouldn't pay that much attention to, waking up in the morning and look, and if the device says you're not getting enough dream sleep or deep sleep, irrelevant information. What are you going to do with that? There's no, and they're not, most devices are not very accurate when it comes to that either.
Got it. So it's mainly just a tool to it's basically like having a sleep diary, like the way that you give it to your players, but it's just easier for the everyday person to just have it done automatically.
Very good. That's exactly it.
Okay, awesome. Because I definitely might sometimes get caught up in the numbers and saying, oh my God, it's telling me that I'm at 5% or that I should be tired, but I feel fine. Definitely.
Right. Well, and the other thing is that there's nothing you can do about it, right? I mean, if it's telling you you're getting less deep sleep, well, what are you going to do about it? The only thing you can make a difference in is making sure you get enough time in bed, because that'll make sure that you're getting enough sleep.
Dr. Singh, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it and learned so much hearing from you and things that I'm going to obviously apply into my own sleep schedule and my own life, and obviously the advice I give to whether it's my players or my friends and family. So thank you so much for that. And if you could please let our listeners know where they can keep up with you and follow you and see your impact on the court or football field next.
Okay, so I am on LinkedIn, Meeta Singh MD. I do have a website. It's called meetasinghmd.com. And then I'm on Twitter. It's at AthleteSleepMD1. And on Instagram, it's AthleteSleepMD. And, you can get in touch with me on any of these 4 social media, as well as the website. That would be a good idea.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Thanks for listening to Gen Z Hoops. Make sure to follow, like, and subscribe on Instagram, LinkedIn, and all major social media platforms at Gen Z Hoops. You can tune in and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and every other podcast platform on the planet. Get ready for the next episode.